So if you haven't heard before, Cloudflare just released something that everyone has been waiting for. Yes, that is containers. So in this video, we're going to explore Cloudflare containers by building a little bun full stack dev app type thing. And we're going to see what the container thing is all about. There's a few things that are a little bit different and a few things that should feel very familiar to you. Let's get started. So the fastest way you can get started with Cloudflare containers is to basically just use their create command. So there's a command called npm create Cloudflare, or in this case bun create Cloudflare at latest, and then you use this template variable is equal to Cloudflare templates containers template. It's quite a mouthful, but just beware, if you're using npm instead of bun, you'll have to do npm create, and then instead of just the single double dash, you'll have to do a double dash and a space like that in order to pass the command line arguments. So we're going to look at what this creates by the default template, but we're not going to work in that template. We're going to start something completely from scratch. So we have bun create Cloudflare at latest, and template is that long string. We're going to create it in the Cloudflare test container, something like that. And it's cloning, installing all the dependencies. Then I'm going to have a quick explanation of like what containers are. You probably already know if you've used Docker before or anything like that. So containers are basically just a very isolated environment where all from the operating system level, which is kind of like a virtual machine running your operating system. It's a closed off area of your application running on a specific architecture and having all the specific dependencies and runtimes installed that you need, and it boxes it up, which makes it nice to like share between computers and run the same exact setup on every single device that you use. So containers have been available widely. I mean, Google Cloud, you could push up a container and run with Google Cloud Run. AWS has the Elastic Container Service, I think it's called, where you use Fargate or something to basically point to your container that's busy running. And now Cloudflare also released the same thing, where you can build a Docker container, push it up, and basically run a little app in an isolated environment. The benefits of this is you can use whatever language you want, whatever dependencies you need, and spin it up. With Cloudflare though, there's a little bit of a caveat where every container is basically invoked by a Cloudflare worker. So almost like a Lambda function in AWS is the thing that actually gets called. And then you start your container by forwarding the request to that container. So your container must expose a port of a running server so that the worker can forward the request to that port. The thing that you have to keep in mind is that containers are ephemeral, so they die. So now that we've spun up the template of Cloudflare, let's have a look inside. Basically, you have the Cloudflare setup of the Wrangler config, which tells you everything you need to know about this thing. And we're going to build this out ourselves. We're going to define the name, the main, all those kind of things. The important part obviously is this container, and we tell it to build a Docker file, and we tell it to have max instances of 10. You could set this to 1 if you don't want to have too many instances running, and you can give it a name. Then you have to set a durable object in your binding, which defines your container again. And this little name over here is what you'll be using in the env of Cloudflare. So we also have to set up this migrations, which strange enough uses SQLite classes. So I'm not 100% sure what that means, but basically you define your container within this new SQLite classes array and give it a tag. So that's the basic setup. And what this specific container does, it has a Hono app as the Cloudflare worker, but at the top of the worker you see this my container, which extends container. You give it a port, you give it how long it should stay awake. You can inject environment variables, and you can give it a bunch of methods to run on certain events. In this one, it uses Hono which lets you define like these different routes and what it should respond with. But this is a little bit overkill, I think, for us. We just want to create a container that runs Bun natively, not like just the Bun scripts, but physically the runtime of Bun is going to run the app, and it's going to serve a Bun Bun full stack application. So we're not even going to use Hono. We're just going to export default the fetch function from Cloudflare and just forward everything. So if we look within container source, you'll see that it just builds some Go code, and in the Docker file, it pulls from Golang and then starts a server after building the Go app. And in our case, we're going to make a Docker file for the Bun app. So right now we're in an empty directory. If I do ls, there's nothing. And I'm also going to use Bun to manage the dependencies of this project, but just remember that Bun doesn't run in the worker itself. I'm just going to use it to install dependencies and basically to just have a project set up. But this root project won't be running on Bun within Cloudflare. Just remember that. So we're going to do a Bun init of a blank project. And then we're going to install a couple of dependencies we need. First, we need at Cloudflare the containers. Then we also need to install the React DOM package and add type/React DOM, because we're going to make a little React application within Bun. And we should also, let's run that first, and then we should install some dev dependencies, which is going to be Wrangler. So Wrangler is like the CLI tool that allows you to interact with your Cloudflare stuff, and it also allows you to run a local version of your app. So containers actually already work right out of the bat with your local Docker. So that's pretty cool. So after installing our dependencies, what we're going to do is basically define our Wrangler file. So we're going to delete this index.ts, and we're going to create a file called wrangler.json with comments, JSON C. Create an object, and then the first thing we want to do is define a schema. And I have already copied this because you have to pull it from your node modules, Wrangler, and then config schema. So once we have a schema, we can give it a name, and we're going to say Bun app, and we're going to give it a main, which is going to be in source index.ts. Let's call it Bun container app, and then the main is going to be in there. And then we also want to define a compatibility date. This is not right. We can do 2025/06/25. And we need some compatibility flags. Instead of Bun, we need Node.js compat, I believe. Then what we want to do is we want to define a containers field. And containers is an array. In this case, we're just going to have one container. So this requires a class name. And the class name is basically the same name as we're going to export from the TS file. And we're going to call that something like Bun container, which will extend the container class. And then we're also going to give it a name. We'll just say Bun, let's call this Bun app. We're also going to give it the image, which is going to pull from the Docker file, which we haven't written yet. And we're also going to give it a max instances, in this case, of 1. So that's how we define our container. The next thing we have to define is our durable objects bindings. So in the bindings, we create an object which basically relates to our same class name that we defined at the top. So instead of my durable object, we're going to call this Bun container. And we also need to give it a name. And this name is the name that we'll be referencing in the env. So we're going to say Bun container, and it's just a convention to make this uppercase. And then along with that, we have to define a migrations field, which, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure what this means, because maybe I haven't read the docs well enough. But basically, we have to say this new SQLite classes, and then within there we have to again use the Bun container, and we also need to add a tag. And I guess this should be in here. And this is going to be v1. So that's about it for our Wrangler file. Once we have this Wrangler file, we're able to define our entry point for our function. So let's do So actually, before we do that, there is a script that we can already define. We're going to call it gen types, because Wrangler has a way to basically look at your Wrangler .jsonc and then generate the types for you in your project, which makes it a bit easier to sort of have type safe stuff. So we're going to do that, and we're going to say bun gen types. Why did that not work? Scripts, not just script. So we're going to say bun gen types, and basically generates all the different env stuff for us. So now we can easily define everything we need in our source and index.ts, because remember we defined that as our entry point over here, source index.ts. And just to see what that generated was a bunch of, so you can see our durable object is over there, but all of these types have now been generated. So you don't need to fiddle with that. You can just run the types command, and then all is done for you. So this is where we write our entry point. So the source index.ts is the entry point of the Cloudflare worker, and this worker forwards the request to our container. So what we're going to do is we're going to import container and get container from at Cloudflare Containers, and then we're going to define our container, and this name needs to be the same name as the class name we defined in our Wrangler. So we called that bun container, I believe, and this extends container. And what we need to do in here, actually we only need one thing, and that's just to tell it what port this is running on. So we can say default port, so you can see that's a property, and then instead of number we can just do equals 3000. So that's basically all we need to do to define our container. There are things like on start and on stop and on error that you can use to get different events, and also we need to add an override to this because it's a class, it's a field override. And now we can define our fetch handler, which is just the normal syntax of a Cloudflare worker. So I'm going to say async fetch, and this is going to take in a request, which is a request, and an env, which I think we can get from cloudflare.env. So if we look at this, then let's do env dot. Okay, cool. So it actually has our bun container. And now all we have to do is get that container equals get container, the env dot bun container. And then all we have to do is basically return await container dot fetch with the request. So this is saying that it's not assignable to that. So I think what we can do is let's just define a type up here. So we're going to say type our env is equal to that, and then I'm just going to say bun container. Instead of a string, we're going to say a durable object namespace with a type of bun container, and then env instead of Cloudflare env, we can do our env. And that should do it. This is basically our entire worker entry code. At the moment, this won't do anything because we don't have any container code running. But after this, we don't have to touch anything. So you might wonder, well, what if I want this worker to do more than just request, the different, or just forward everything to my container? There are helper functions, I believe, that basically you can say something like env.buncontainer.get, and then you can provide the container ID. So that if you have multiple IDs, then you can get the ID from saying like const ID equals env.buncontainer ID from name. And then instead of my container, the way that Cloudflare defines this is like /container and then a number. So if you have multiple ones running, you can do like 1 or 2 or 3, but I think if you just have one running, it either has to be 0 or 1. But if you just have one running, you don't have to do that. You can just define it like get container directly on this thing. So we just have one container and forwarding everything. And then you could like get the URL equals new URL from the request.url. Then you could also say like if url.pathname starts with something like container / then only forward it, and then use the other routes to do other API things. But we're going to keep it simple. We're just going to forward everything to our little bun container. So that should be it for our worker. Let's go add a script to our package.json, which we'll call dev, and we'll just say Wrangler dev. And we'll also have, we just basically need that. Those are the only two things we need. You might even call this start, because you're only going to run this in the local development. So I think that should be fine. And now what we need to do is create our bun application. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new directory called bun source. And then within there, we can initialize a new bun project. I'm not going to type out every single file now. I'm going to, I'll show you afterwards everything I add in there. But for now, what I'm going to show you is the Docker file. And in the Docker file, we're going to say that from oven bun latest, let's do that as base. And then we'll set the working directory as app, and then we'll do the installation of the dependencies in its own step, because Cloudflare does respect multiple layers, and it does all the caching and everything. So we're going to call this from base as install. We're going to copy the package.json, actually not the package.json, the bun source package.json. We're going to copy to our own, and then we're going to run bun install production. And we're also going to then define our runner. So we're going to do base as runner, which is a different step. We're going to copy from install app node modules to the current node modules. And then we're going to copy everything from bun source to the root, not to bun source. And then we're going to set the user as bun, and we're going to expose the port 3000, because that's what we defined in our bun container, I believe. Let's do this TCP, and then CMD would be bun run start. So this is all to do with everything that we put in our bun source folder. So let me add some files there and then go through them to explain how the bun app works. Actually, before I do that, let me just add a .docker ignore and then paste in all of this. It's just so that Docker doesn't copy like the node modules. When you say copy ... or copy everything from a folder, it skips these files. You would just have to maybe check if you plan on copying your .env file, which is not recommended. I've put that in there as well, so you might have to remove that, but maybe you shouldn't be doing that, because if you remember that in over here, there's not over here in the actual container definition, we could do something like env vars, and if you remember how we do that, it's just going to be like an object. So over here we could define something like stripe API key, and then get this from some from process.env.stripe API key or something like that. So you can pass along your env vars from your actual environment. So rather don't put your env file in your container. That's not very safe. But anyway, let me do the bun source and then we'll check it out. All right, so the bun app is very simple. If you remember, we installed our the React DOM dependencies in our root package.json, but that was actually wrong. We shouldn't have done that. We can remove that from our root package.json because we don't need that right there. And we've instead added a complete fresh project within the bun source directory. We've added two scripts, which is setting a node env of development for the dev mode, and the start is basically just running the TypeScript directly. You could add a build step and do a bun build minify, compile, all that jazz. You can check the bun docs on how to make a single file executable, but I decided to skip that. I'm just going to execute the TypeScript directly because bun pretty good at doing that as well. So let's look at the app. The entry point of the app is server.ts. What it does is it firstly imports an index.html, which is this file. Very bare bones. It has a div with the ID app. It has script type module importing source main.tsx, and that is a React app, just a basic React app with an app component that renders hello world, and that is coming from here. It has props, which is the initial message, and it also has a thing where it fetches package details, which is basically API package JSON. It stringifies that JSON and gives you the version and the name of the package. It makes that request, and then you have a button that you can click to update the message. But let me show you back in the server, the API package JSON, just to show you that this actually is running bun. We are using the bun.file function to read the package JSON and then responding with that JSON in the response. Then we are defining the development environment, and then we're also setting a thing where if a route is requested and we can't find it, then we just ignore that. We send a 404, but we check the bun.env.node.env to make development mode or not. So we can actually go into bun source and just do a bun install, and then do bun dev, I believe. So if we open up this application now, you can see we have a hello world. Let me zoom in a little bit. We have a hello world. We can update the message, so you actually see this is a React app running in the application. The other thing is it's also importing some base styles in the main.tsx up here. Yeah, so just a basic bun app running on a server. So we have sort of full stack app type of semantics where you have an API and a client, which is running like a SPA type thing. And now we should have everything we need in order to run this with Wrangler, if I'm not mistaken. So let's try doing bun start. Sorry, we're in the wrong folder. We have to go back and do bun start. So now you can see the first thing that it tells me is that my types might be out of date. So let me just go out of this server. Okay, so I might have crashed it, but also it's important to note that this is a public beta, so things can go wrong. I think this is the second time this has happened to me, so I might as well just share how I try to resolve it. So I'm going to do bun start again, and you can see that it tells me, okay, so now Docker runs, but initially it didn't run. It tells me I need to update my types, which I'll do in a second, but it was just stuck on a blank screen. Control-C didn't work, nothing worked. But what does work is if you press R to rebuild the containers, if it's stuck like that. I had to press it like twice, and then it tries building it twice. It takes a while to kick off, so give it like a minute to figure out what's happening. If that doesn't work, go to your Docker sort of system. It could also be OrbStack, and then just check that there are some builds happening, or click around to see that something's happening. And if that's not working, reach out to Cloudflare, leave them a message saying, well, your local Docker builds aren't working. But it worked for me. So I'm going to first cancel this one. I'm just going to rerun the gen type. So bun gen types. And it did run that again. And then I'm going to run bun start. So this is how the flow usually works. It's kind of quick after the initial build, because you can see it's using cached data from the different install steps. So if we follow this link now, let's see what happens. And we actually get our running server host of just starting that app. This is the Wrangler URL. So the next step, if you want to get this up and running in an actual sort of a Cloudflare environment, all you have to do is do bunx wrangler deploy. But yeah, that's basically how you can deploy it. If it's deployed, or if you're running it, let me just show you one more time. There's another error message that in this beta is popping up, that once you request the thing, you'll see sometimes the first load doesn't work. It tells you fail to check if the container is running, network connection lost, stuff like that. But if you see that, just refresh the page again and then it starts working. So there are definitely some kinks to sort out, but it actually works. Like, it's actually getting everything, and it's running Bun natively. It's not like running Node.js. So that's pretty cool. So there you have it. That is like my quick rundown on the new Cloudflare containers, testing out the beta, seeing how we could run Bun, for instance. But that's just a small example. It's still TypeScript, so it feels like a little bit too close to home. You could run Zig, you could run C. Let's imagine you have like heavy graphics processing that you need to do. You don't want to use like Sharp with Node in a worker, because sometimes that doesn't even work. But you can just run graphics magic or whatever the C library is directly in a container. You'll just have to set up like listening to incoming TCP requests and stuff like that. But once you have it set up and running, you are running pure C on your on the data you need, which is going to be much faster. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like and maybe subscribe if you want to, and let me know what else you want to see. I'm excited for the future of these containers. I think it's going to give a couple of the other cloud providers a little bit of a run for their money, because the one cool thing about Cloudflare is that it's global automatically. You don't have to define regions. You don't have to mess with all of that. It runs it where your users are. Just be cautious with that, because there is pricing attached to this. So just make sure you check out what the different kind of prices are. And also, finally, for you to be able to use this, you need to be on a worker paid plan. Sorry, I didn't mention that earlier, but you can't test this out. Or you can test it locally, but you can't deploy it if you don't have a paid plan. So just be aware of that. Anyway, see you next time.